Every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube and Facebook, I host a 2-hour show where I go over current and sometimes not so current true crime stories. It's called Unfound Live. Well, today I've picked out the top 5 most covered topics on that show, and I bring them to all of you with in-depth analysis on each. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. This episode is actually an idea that popped into my head during the hiatus time I took over January and February. I'm doing fine, by the way. My sleep has been most excellent. But I didn't expect to be unleashing this top 5 on you until April. However, due to some talks and interviews that fell through, here we are. Yep, that still happens even though I'm 8.5 years into this podcast. People no calling, no showing, say they're going to be interviewed and then they don't want to be interviewed. It's as exasperating as ever. Anyway, since I know many of you still have not checked out the live show, this will be a good chance to get a sample of what goes on there, where you get to hear my opinions on cases, something I don't do on this podcast publicly. Once again, the live show comes out on Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube and Facebook. The very next day, Tuesday, it is released as a podcast called Unfound Live. Please subscribe to it on the application you're using right now. And no, I'm not going to tell you what the 5 most popular cases have been on the live show. You'll just have to let this podcast play and allow yourself to be surprised. But first, Unfound News. It's the end of the month, so be looking for the next Unfound Now on the YouTube channel. The one I featured last month, Belvedere, got solved not long after February's episode was released. Next, Patreon and YouTube supporters should also be looking for the next Found episode, where I pick out a disappearance that eventually got resolved. It's always instructive to hear how these cases get solved. Finally, the next update episode will be released the final Friday of April. Fortunately, I already know I have quite a few disappearances to discuss. So how I'm going to do this is no different than how I do an update episode, where I have some notes in front of me and I just use those notes. I'm not recording full sentences and paragraphs. I've not written anything like that down, as I've stated many times in the update episodes. If I were to do that, I'd be there for hours and hours and hours and hours. So for each of these cases, all 5 of them, I just have some words, some important phrases that I think I need to not forget to make sure I get my point across as far as my insights on each of these cases. And of course, we have a variety here of a serial killer, 2 murders, an incident, let's just say, and a serial killer. So it's a nice range of cases. But for none of these am I getting into the depths of any of them, unlike what we do with the disappearances that are featured on Unfound. I'm just going to talk about those ideas that caused me to think the way I do about each of these cases, some insights. And of course, I'm also going to try to be as objective as possible in looking at the opposite side. What other people think, that are opposite of what I think might be the strengths and weaknesses of those ideas. Now, of course, for each one of these, you could go on for hours and hours and hours. I could. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to limit each of these cases to about a half hour. So 30 minutes. There's 5 of them. That's 150 minutes. And that'll make this episode somewhere around 2.5 hours, and I'll split it up into 2 parts. Whereas, of course, the first one I'm going to discuss, it was its own podcast series, episode after episode after episode. So we know how deep we can get into the weeds with all of these cases. I'm not doing that. That is not the purpose of today's episode. I just thought you'd find it interesting to see what I think about all of these cases, all of which you know, maybe not in depth, but you've certainly heard of all of them. And if you're not a live show watcher or listener, then you might not know that I have talked extensively on these particular topics, especially over the last couple of years. So I think you're going to find this really interesting, especially also since when it comes to the episodes, the Disappearance episodes, 360 now, I don't publicly tell you what I think, although I do write about that on patreon.com, and you can go there, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. All right, so let's get started. The first one that I guess many people would say that put true crime podcasting on the map over 10 years ago, and that was the murder of Hae Min Lee. And, of course, the number one suspect has been Adnan Syed since this occurred in 1999. What exactly do I think about this? Well, first we need to recognize that this is the murder that eventually became the podcast series Serial, that I think even to this day is still the number one. It's one of the first true crime podcasts out that existed as true crime podcasting is understood now here in 2025. And I still think it's like the number one podcast as far as downloads and everything, as far as episodes go of all time. But as I've stated many times, and this is going to seem funny given that I'm going to be talking about Hae's murder, that I've never listened to an episode of Serial. Everything that I've learned about this case is from actual news articles, of course, Wikipedia, and maybe I've listened to some other podcasts about the murder or YouTube videos, but I've never listened to Serial for whatever reason. But kind of coincidentally, my friend, a friend of the podcast, Zodiac Killer over at The Consult, currently they're doing a 2-part series on the murder of Hae Min Lee. So I would ask you to check her FBI opinion on it, along with her co-host FBI opinions on who they think killed Hae Min Lee and what happened. So that just came out today. I'm recording this on March 26, 2025. Their coverage came out today as well. I got to tell you, I absolutely 100% believe that Adnan Syed killed Hae Min Lee. I realize that there are some things, let's just say, going on with the cell phone records, with this Jay Wilds character. But the way I look at it is this, and like I said before I started, I just have some points out here that really speak to me, and using what I've learned about disappearances and applying it to other types of crimes or incidents. And what sticks out to me the most is that Hae Min Lee was not raped. And there are surely statistics out there that, and so just me as a layman, I would say that this, to me, means most likely that the killer has had sex with the victim already. Of course, I understand rape is not about sex, it's about power. I understand that. But I'm guessing that when women are murdered and it is believed that the person is a stranger, that it is much, 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 much more likely that this woman is going to be raped. We could even think about another case we all know, the original Night Stalker. He was a stranger to all of the women that he raped and that he assaulted and killed. He raped all of them. Pretty much all of them, I think. 90-some% of them. And he was a stranger to all of them. And I think that is the track record for this, is that when you find women who are raped and killed, most likely they are murdered by men who did not know them. Whereas when we start getting into boyfriends killing girlfriends, or exes killing exes, or husbands killing wives, or even in homosexual relationships, same-sex marriages, whatever, when we have two people who know each other or two people who are romantic, I think that the chances of rape, the evidence of rape, is a lot lower. I think. Now, I'm sure there's some stats out there somewhere. So given that Hae Min Lee was not raped, I automatically jumped to the idea she was killed by somebody she knew, most likely, of course, unfortunately for my gender, a guy. So this already puts Adnan toward the top of the list without anything else. They were a couple. I'm guessing they had intimate relations at least once. So he has to go on the list. Now, of course, would other men that Hae Min Lee dated or had any relationships with go up there too? Yes. But Adnan certainly has to be put on the list toward the top. Other main point for me is no weapon. She was strangled to death. Yes, she was hit over the head. She had some injuries, but the method of death was being strangled. And that takes a while. 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes generally. It's not like it is in the movies. Which means no weapon, and this guy chose to murder her anyway. This tells me that this was not planned necessarily. Obviously, whoever did this had the capacity to kill, but it wasn't something that this person really thought far ahead on. And so for me, as a disappearance guy, this reminds me of the kind of disappearance I call the man said, where I'm inclined to believe that these men didn't necessarily mean to kill their wives and girlfriends, but they did in the heat of the moment. Some argument that went that one step further. Maybe there was a pushing down the steps or something like that, and she's injured, she's broken a leg or something, and the guy knows there's no going back now because he has to believe she's going to call 911, she's going to tell the police, and he's going to go to jail, and so he has to finish the job in the heat of the moment. Crimes of passion. No weapons generally involved. I don't know what the stats are, but how many husbands kill their wives by shooting them or stabbing them? My inclination, it's more about non-weapon violence. Just an idea. But whoever killed her didn't bring a weapon along. I think that's noteworthy, which means this was not some guy cruising around looking for some woman to murder. If he had been doing that, he would have had a gun. He would have had a knife or something. Doesn't seem this killer did. This, to me, then once again points at somebody who knew Hae Min Lee, was trying to reason with her, was trying to talk to her, was trying to work something out, and it wasn't going so well. So that also then puts Adnan Syed at the top of the list. I also ask you this. What are the odds that the two break up, but it's some other guy, not Adnan, who kills her? We know how turbulent breakups can be. Now, not all breakups. Some people are just happy to get away from each other. But for the most part, they're fairly turbulent, emotional, a lot of irrational thinking. I'm never going to find anybody else again. I may never have sex again. Nobody's ever going to love me like she did. Right? We've all, even me. We've all been there. So what are the odds that all of these emotions were going on between the two of them, but then it's somebody else comes in and kills Hae Min Lee? It's certainly possible. It's conceivable. It doesn't defy any laws of physics. It's certainly possible. I'm not going to say it's never happened. But how probable is that? It doesn't seem very probable to me. Moving on, and this is certainly a topic right up Unfound's alley, and that would be the alibi given by this student, young woman, girl, Asia McClain, who claims that she was actually talking to Adnan in the library at about the same time they estimate that Hae Min Lee was being killed. And this is a point of contention during the trials. The first one, there was a hung jury or a mistrial, something like that. And then this got included, but the lawyer messed up. And you know how I feel about these types of situations. People cannot be believed. I'm not saying Asia McClain is lying. Absolutely not. More, I think, along the lines of she probably got the date wrong. I'm not saying she and Adnan never spoke in the library at some point, but it's just eyewitness testimony is the least reliable of all evidence. It's not even close. Would have to put it down there. You know how many of you feel, how I feel about dogs and polygraphs. It's worse than that. It's worse than that. And I also wonder, we have to remember that he went to jail and Serial didn't come out until like 15 years later. And the retrial and all of that. Where was she all these years? Is there proof that, for example, in 2005 or 2008 or 2011, she's knowing that Adnan's in jail? Was she going on any true crime shows? Of course, this is before podcasting. But was she posting anything anywhere? Was she writing anything anywhere saying that, I don't know why he got convicted, and because I know he was in the library with me, why wasn't she yelling from the highest building about this? It doesn't seem she was. I'm not saying she never talked to anybody about it. But as best as I can tell, nobody really knew about Asia McClain until Serial came along. That's Serial's claim to fame. They tracked down a witness. Though, the people who started Serial, you can find quotes of them saying, yeah, we tracked down this witness. That's probably why Serial got as much attention as it did. Why did it take 15 years for somebody in the public, a reporter or somebody, to track her down? It seems to me then Asia must have been being pretty quiet. I mean, if you have knowledge that somebody got screwed over in a trial, you have personal knowledge, an eyewitness account, you were talking to the person, you were in the same room as the person, whereas there was a murder taking place 15 miles away, and then the person you're talking to, is convicted. Would you not make sure everybody knew that it was a wrongful conviction? You'd think. So I have big problems there. I think the library story must be rejected, and certainly, if I were doing a podcast and something like that came up, it would be discussed with the guest, certainly, but I would certainly give the other side of it as well, saying eyewitnesses, well, you want to believe them, but it's best not to. But we have to cover it because it's out there. You've heard me say this before at least a few times. So I'm just not encouraged. I know this seems to be a big deal for a lot of people, but probably people who don't know a lot about this particular phenomenon of witnesses lying, or witnesses getting dates wrong, or witnesses just getting involved in cases so they can get attention. All very, very common. Very common. Moving on, the DNA. The lot has been made. Well, if he killed her, why was none of his DNA, Adnan's DNA, on Hae Min Lee? He had to have killed her some way. It was strangulation. If he did it, he had to have put her hands on her arms, his arms around her neck, or however he strangled her. They had close contact. Why no DNA? Well, you have to look at it this way. Unless it was some sort of blood that was on, Adnan's blood that was on her, that had dried, maybe she scratched him on the face or somewhere and his blood got on her. Other than that, given that the two knew each other, would you not suspect that maybe there would be DNA on her from him anyway? Maybe. I realize she takes showers and everything. That's not what I'm saying, but on clothes or something. Even if they had found his DNA on her, could not a good defense attorney have said, well, you know what? Why is anybody surprised by that? They knew each other. Nobody denies that. They were a couple. Now, if they were complete strangers and never crossed paths, seemingly, and his DNA was on there, then that would be on her, then that would be something. But being that they knew each other anyway, DNA, I don't know how insightful that's going to be unless it's very specific on a specific part of the body and a specific amount. It would have to be very, very specific. Just general DNA of Adnan on Hae Min Lee would not affect my thinking too much because they knew each other. What I would also say is, if it's not Adnan, then what are we talking about? What kind of killer do all the people who don't think Adnan did it, what kind of killer do you then have in mind? Now, some of you really who are schooled out there might remember the murder of Morgan Harrington. I can remember when she went missing. Remember, she was the Metallica concert girl. She went to the concert, and then, of course, the stupid rule that if you leave the venue, you can't get back in. She somehow went outside the venue. She said she'd wait for her friends. We ultimately know that she got picked up or abducted and was murdered, and her body wasn't found for a while. And that guy was eventually caught through DNA because he had raped a woman before that. I don't know if he'd murdered any other women. So this might be like that. Maybe this is a situation just like Morgan Harrington got outside that venue and got picked up by somebody. This is what happened to Hae Min Lee as well. And we're inclined to believe with Morgan Harrington's murderer that the reason he was in that area is because, pardon the English, but it was a target-rich atmosphere. He was cruising around that area looking for a woman by herself. That's why it was on a college campus. So you could think, well, there was somebody cruising around this school campus and somehow convinced Hae Min to get in the car or forced her, something like that. Certainly conceivable. Of course, the big difference with the two cases, if you want to compare and contrast, is that Morgan Harrington was raped. Hae Min Lee was not. I'll go back to where I started with this. When you have these kind of situations where guys are cruising around campuses and schools and wherever else, the bar district, nightclub district, they're looking to rape women. Maybe kill them if that's what it takes, but at least rape them. Hae Min Lee wasn't raped. So what kind of killer then are we talking about here? Who's cruising around just looking to kill women? I'm not saying it's never happened. It just seems unlikely. And like I said, I think the way everything circumstantially lines up, that this was somebody who knew Hae Min Lee. Whereas I'm not at all, I was never convinced that it was somebody who knew Morgan Harrington who killed her. So even though they seem maybe on the surface similar, they're really not. Not. Because we have to remember, are there any other women in that area where this happened that were picked up by some stranger and raped but lived? And they didn't get a good look at his face or anything. Are there any crimes like that around where Hae Min Lee got murdered back in the late 1990s into the 2000s? Is there any sign there was some sort of pattern going on? Not to my knowledge, and I haven't been able to find any information like that anywhere. And even though I haven't listened to Serial, I kind of know what generally was talked about there. I don't think they made any sort of statement like that either, even though they started the podcast because they thought that Adnan was innocent. Well, if you could show that there was a pattern going on, like there was some serial killer in that area or serial rapist, that would certainly help Adnan. But that's not out there, it probably wasn't happening. So Hae Min Lee's murder was kind of a one-time event in that area. This makes it much more likely that this was a crime between two people who knew each other. So for all those people who think Adnan didn't do it, I just want to know, what kind of person do you think did do it? And then finally, this is always something that I fall back on, is we have to remember I have very detailed knowledge about the murder of Janelle Matthews and the conviction of Steve Pankey. And remember, Steve was convicted, granted it took twice to do it. But I continue to state that if Steve Pankey killed Janelle Matthews and what he was convicted on, the evidence, and I hope we can do that series sometime this year, but I don't think, I don't know if it's just such a good idea, even though I have all the materials. But anyway, if he killed Janelle, then certainly Adnan killed Hae Min Lee. If Steve can be convicted of killing Janelle, then certainly Adnan can be convicted of killing Hae Min Lee. Because remember, Steve didn't know Janelle, even her own family admits that. Whereas Adnan did know Hae Min Lee and had a relationship with her. And they were broken up. On and on and on. Now, I realize there's the cell phone data that's out there. We talk about cell phone data on Unfound. We talk about the records. We talk about the pings. We talk about it as much as we can, given what we know, and a lot of families don't have those records. And, of course, we cover a lot of disappearances that, of course, occurred before the cell phone era. And we cover it, but always remembering cell phones make mistakes. They're not perfect. You certainly can be on a cell phone and the phone be pinging off another tower and not the tower closest to your location. It's very common. Towers, especially in cities, get overloaded, and so you get rerouted to some other tower. Not uncommon. Of course, it depends on the carrier. There's so many factors, but you still have to talk about it. So with Adnan's, I realized that there came up with some discrepancies, but I'll also say this. Then what are the odds, though, if there were discrepancies, what are the odds that the thing just happened to ping in near the park where Hae Min was found? Even if, it's not like his phone pinged in China and he's here in the United States. It's still pinged in the area, even if it was a mistake. What are the odds that his phone would happen to ping in the area where his ex-girlfriend was eventually found? It seems somewhat unlikely. Even though it might have been pinging all over these other areas, all over the town, the city, whatever. What are the odds that one of those locations was the park? So that's why I think the way I do about Adnan. And like I said when I started this, I think that you might want to check out The Consult. They're doing a 2-part series. Part 1 came out today. And those are FBI people talking about it. So I think I kind of know what direction they're going with this, even with Part 1. So if you aren't feeling my insight into Adnan's guilt, maybe you'll listen over there and think like they do, because it does seem that myself and they over at The Consult are thinking the same way. Maybe not. We'll find out next week. All right, let's move on to the next most popular case, one of the most popular cases that gets discussed on the live show that I do every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube and Facebook. And that would be the disappearance of Jennifer Kesse. Of all disappearances that Unfound has not yet covered, surely Jennifer's is the one that I have discussed the most on the live show over the last... the live show got started in the fall of 2017, so over the past 7.5 years, surely her disappearance is the one that's got mentioned the most that we've not yet featured on the podcast. Why is that? Well, a lot of other people, I guess, have made news of it. I think that her parents, although I do have some criticisms for them that I'm going to discuss here in a few moments, I think her parents have done an excellent job of keeping the case out there, of keeping her name out there, her picture out there. It also doesn't hurt that they've had run-ins or disagreements with the Orlando Police Department. They've gone to court. They've gotten records that they've wanted, although that took some time. And then the very nature of Jennifer, when we look at Jennifer the person, and then we look at the circumstances, all of that, I think is then very understandable that why she's one of the most well-known missing people as far as average person, not famous person, not Amelia Earhart or something like that. One of the most well-known regular people in the United States, maybe vying for that title with Mara Murray and Brian Schaefer. Of course, with Brian Murray, they have been featured on the podcast. And even though I did not live in Florida at the time that she went missing, I can remember early on when this disappearance occurred, that going on to web sleuths, other places, and talking to many people about her disappearance. And how do I want to put this? It's very possible. I don't know how probable it is, but it's very possible that I am the person who started the idea going back, 20 years now, that her disappearance actually starts on Monday night and not Tuesday morning. It very well may be you're listening to the person who started that theory. Because when I got involved, once again, 20 years ago, well before Unfound, I can remember thinking that. I can remember thinking, I don't understand why all the people in this forum and over here and over there are so sure that she disappeared on Tuesday morning, and her being attacked, abducted, taken away by landscapers or whoever, somebody in the complex, when I'm looking at what they're looking at and seeing something totally different. So if you, maybe because you've already listened to the live show and you know my attitude toward her disappearance, maybe that's in your head already. But for all of you who out there who know about Jennifer Kesse's disappearance and have the idea that maybe she went missing on Monday night, it's very possible subconsciously that got into your mind by something you read, and most likely whatever you read, unless it was my very own words, it might have all could be traced back to me. something that I've only maybe just recently begun to appreciate. It's very possible. Because I was going to web sleuths back at the time, and it seems to me, I think I was the first person to bring that up. I've certainly had some people, I think, that came on board and, it kind of maybe changed some minds, but I'm pretty sure I was the first. Anyway, that is my idea regarding Jennifer's disappearance. And it's weird that it wasn't until I started doing Unfound, and not just when I started doing Unfound, but at least a few years into the podcast, maybe 2018, 2019, 2020, that I began to then think back to my original thinking with Jennifer Kesse's disappearance and being able to put what I was learning with the podcast and applying it to her disappearance. And my attitude toward her disappearance, of why even to this day, 20 years later, I think that she went missing on Monday night, has everything to do with her cell phone. And strangely enough, it has nothing to do with any pings or records. It simply has to do with it being on or off. Because I think what we've learned on Unfound regarding cell phones, and realizing that when we talk about cell phone information, for the most part, we're only talking about the last 25 years, maybe. Of course, once Android phones came out, iPhones came out, then everybody got one. So that was around 2005. But the old Nokia phones and those types, they go back to 2000. I can remember working at Star Trek starting in 2000. People had cell phones. I did not. I didn't get my first one until 2003. So you can go back to 2000, 1999, and talk about cell phone information. It's just maybe not as solid as it became in the mid-2000s. But she had a cell phone, and what we've learned in looking at disappearances with cell phones pretty much is when a cell phone ceases to be used or that it is turned off, that is when the disappearance starts. It's very, very clear. It's a really, really good rule to use. Maybe you could say the Pirates of the Caribbean line about they're more like guidelines. You don't, hang the rules. They're more like guidelines anyway. This is not a law. This is not 100% true. But it is a very good rule. It is a very good guideline when you are looking at disappearances yourselves. If you're reading whether Charlie Project, Web Sleuths, when you find out the cell phone information and the phone was turned off at such and such a time, or the person stopped receiving or sending back messages at such and such a time, that is when the disappearance has started. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's foul play. But that's when the disappearance starts. That is the point at where you look at it and say, we got to really, really understand what went on then. Where, if we do think it's foul play, where was everybody else at that time? And location, were they close to that location? So for Jennifer, as has been widely published over the last 20 years, her phone went off on Monday night. Now remember, she had gone on this vacation with a fiancé. She came back. She ended up going to work Monday, but she didn't go home first. She drove the whole way from wherever he was, Miami, wherever. She drove up from there. She goes to work, and then she came home Monday afternoon, Monday evening. We know that she used her phone. It's now very well documented that she had a phone call with her fiancé, and maybe it wasn't like the nicest phone call in the world. I don't know why, but I think that's, of course, it's only two of them who were part of the call. That's what he said, that some contentious, I don't know, maybe knowing they were going to be apart for a while again, they're a little anxious about that. Very possible. I'm not saying that it necessarily has to be anything suspicious. It's just my understanding is the conversation was not all rainbows and unicorns. And right after that, her phone was turned off. Never, how do we know that? Well, the ping information. It never pings off another tower anywhere ever again. And her phone, by the way, is still missing. 20 years later. And then something happened, and then we know the next day her car is being driven by somebody else. It's parked in that apartment complex not far away from where Jennifer lived. The person gets out of the car, and one of the most unfortunate sequences in the history of crime. The person's face is blocked out by bars of a fence, and the camera is not a continuously video. It's not continuously. It's not regular video. Filming every little millisecond. It's only taking a picture so many seconds, and it just happened to be that this camera was timed at the same rate that this person was walking behind these bars of this fence. I can't even begin to tell you how unfortunate that is. And that person walked off, and at least publicly, we don't know who that person is. Probably a guy, but you will find people out there thinking that it might have been a woman. But as most of you probably know, though, the most popular theory even to this day is that Jennifer was leaving her place, and she had mentioned in the past there were landscapers or construction people, and because this was kind of a newer complex, and she was getting bad vibes from them, being stared at, etc. And the belief then, because of that, is that one or multiple men from this group were waiting for her or something, and they abducted her and killed her and then dumped her car where it was eventually found. That is certainly the most popular theory. Now, I reject that. Why do I reject that? It goes back to phone usage, and this is true for cell phones back when Jennifer went missing right up to this very day. What we have to understand, what's most important to understand, is her phone never came back on after Monday night. So what we're expected to believe then with this not my theory, but this other theory, the most popular theory, is that Tuesday morning, Jennifer got up, took a shower, brushed her teeth, combed her hair, whatever women do in the morning, picked out her clothes, picked out her shoes, had her breakfast, put all her stuff together, including her phone, left her apartment, and never turned on her phone. I have to tell you, this defies everything. All of the information that I've collected on disappearances over the last 8.5 years. Now, it very well may be the situation that back then people were more likely to turn off their phones at night. I will admit, I had a phone by this time. I don't really remember what I used to do with my cell phone at night. I don't remember. But what I also know is, thinking back at that time, is that when you get up in the morning, what do we do? What is one of the first things everybody does? Turn our cell phones on if they're off. I realize people these days do turn phones off for a variety of reasons. And what do they do at their first chance? They turn them back on. And what happens? Within a couple, 30 seconds or something, your phone starts hitting off some tower if you can get service wherever you are. The fact is, Jennifer's phone was never in service ever again after Monday night. Now, you would think, being that she's a professional, and I certainly have complaints about the Orlando Police Department, that they tried to dismiss this as, well, she's a young woman, and she's out there somewhere. She probably just blew off work. This is one of the reasons, even though it's not an unfound disappearance, this is one of the reasons I say disappearances are about people, not circumstances. You understand the person, you can greatly narrow down what happened to that person. You greatly can do that. And what do we think we all know about Jennifer Kesse? She was educated. She was professional. I think she had every intention of working her way up at that company, doing real estate or whatever. It was kind of a real estate company, something like that. I don't think anybody had any complaints about her as being flaky, unlike, for example, Jody Huisentruit, who that morning that she was late for work and got abducted was not the first time she was going to be late for work. That doesn't make her a bad person, but Jody Huisentruit, Jennifer Kesse, two different types of people, even though both of them may have been fine young women. I'm going to come back to Jody Huisentruit in a moment. But Jennifer Kesse certainly would not be the type to blow off work, to go off to Disney World or with some other guy, not her fiance, or anything like that. She wouldn't do that. Too professional, too educated, too independent, too career-minded to do that. Now, if she had a drug problem or something else, then anything's possible. So I have complaints. Don't think I'm taking the Orlando Police Department's side on all this. They screwed this thing up. But you can say they screwed this thing up, but then also think that the Kesse family does not have the disappearance of Jennifer correct. You can be that way. It's okay. So she got up, did all of those things, never turned her phone on. Remember, she just had a fight with her fiancé the night before. She didn't get up that morning, had a chance to sleep on it, and think, you know what, I better call him. Or would she not check her phone, turn her phone on to check that he might have called her? You'd think. Didn't do it. This is a huge issue in this disappearance. But the thing is, really, you can't understand that unless you really, really know disappearances. You can't fully appreciate it. And even though, like I said, back at the time, it seemed like a Monday night scenario made more sense to me. Like I said, I really couldn't put it all together until started doing Unfounded. I don't know if it was something subconscious or something. Maybe I was thinking about my own cell phone usage back at the time in 2004, 2005, 2006. And thinking, I turned my cell phone off at night, but I was working at Star Trek at the time or whatever and really did not have to worry about, business calls or anything like that. But I guess I must have been thinking, maybe I do turn my cell phone off at night, but I turn it on as soon as I get up. Why didn't she? And that leads to maybe she didn't turn it on because she went missing the night before. If something of a foul play nature happened to her, maybe it happened the night before. Because then I start thinking, well, people, and this is once again how, like I said, subconsciously for me, remember this whole episode is about me telling you why I think the way I do in some of these very, very well-known cases. I'm thinking that Jody Huisentruit's disappearance was also in my mind. All these people pushing the abduction scenario for Jennifer. Well, even at the time, we knew because at that point, Jody's disappearance, 9 or 10 years old, we know she was abducted. Nobody debates that. And we know what it looks like. Her stuff was all over the parking lot. Whereas Jennifer allegedly got abducted and not one piece of paper connected to her anywhere. Nowhere. Her phone wasn't found in the parking lot. Things she might carry in her purse weren't found in the parking lot. What else would she have been carrying that day? I don't know. None of it. Seemingly somebody or a group was able to abduct her, and they were like the most fastidious abductors ever. And fastidious means very neat, very organized, to the point of obsession. Whereas we also have Linda K. Carroll. She got abducted out of her house. We know what that looks like. Her hair, part of her hair was stuck in the door jamb. She hit her head and scraped it and ripped off some of her hair. We know what abductions look like on Unfound. Jennifer's does not look like an abduction. We know what abduction looks like for children. Once again, things, a bike laying somewhere. We had a disappearance of a girl that got abducted down in Pompano Beach. Her books were found in a trash can or something. Things are left behind when people get abducted, even children. Jennifer Kesse, nothing. It's very strange. Now, as far as her hair, which I think is the reason her family keeps coming back to the Tuesday morning scenario. Well, she got up, she washed her hair, and the towel was still wet. Most of you have seen me, either on the live show or recent pictures, Facebook or whatever. I have Jennifer Kesse hair, even at 54. I have pretty strong hair genes, and my hair is long, very similar to hers. I wash my hair. I dry my hair with a towel. Here's what I know. Here in Florida, you take a shower the evening before, and you really, really get it dry with a towel, and you hang that towel up. That towel will still be wet the next day. Why? Two main reasons here in Florida. One, everybody uses air conditioning here in Florida, some people even in the winter. Using air conditioning inside in Florida, not unusual in the winter. That's going to keep the air at a temperature where that towel will stay cool and wet. In addition, what does everybody know about Florida? Humidity. High humidity. What this means is water doesn't get soaked up into the air here like it does in Las Vegas. Remember, I moved from one of the driest places in the United States, as far as rain and everything else, and humidity, to one of the wettest here in Florida. I know the difference. You go into a pool in Las Vegas, you get out of the pool, you don't have to use a towel or anything. If it's in the summer, you will be dry in under 5 minutes. Because it's so dang hot, but it's more the humidity. It's so the humidity, the air is just sopping up that water. Here in Florida, it's like 85%, 90% humidity. That's why when you sweat in Florida, your clothes stay wet. In Las Vegas, you're walking out in Las Vegas Boulevard and sweating. Your clothes will stay dry. So this has never really flown with me. And the towel situation, it's circumstantial at best. And the fact is we don't know, what she dried off, what she was watching. We just take what she was washing. We just take for granted, or they were taking for granted, that the towel was wet because she took a shower and dried her and washed her hair. We don't know. Maybe she spilled something and had to clean it up and dry it off with a towel or something. We don't know. It doesn't necessarily have to be her hair or her body. There's no proof of that. The towel's wet. That's all we know. So, I will also add this. There's a reason regarding my scenario of a Monday night scenario. Of course, I'm guessing most of you have read stuff about Jennifer Kesse's disappearance. You do know that the police looked into a coworker scenario, with she having they went and spoke to people at her job. Makes all the sense in the world. But would they really, really, really do that? Would the police do that if they thought that she got abducted by a bunch of landscapers? Would they really do that? This is something else that should stick out to all of you. So that's where I am with Jennifer Kesse. I believe that she got abducted on Monday night. Well, Ed, what are you saying? You mean she... Yes. A lot of... I have never lived with a woman romantically. I've had female roommates, but nothing romantic or anything. No girlfriends or anything. But I know a little bit about living with women. And, us guys, we know for the most part, we don't figure out what we're going to wear the next day until the next morning. Whereas I've lived with enough women to know, a lot of you women out there, you pick out your stuff night before. Why? Because it takes you longer to get ready to go to work in the morning than your average guy does. So you try to do some of those things the night before. Makes all the sense in the world. So when it comes to, the outfits being out and whatever else, she could have been doing that the night before. But what it also means is and this is the most sensitive part of my insight into Jennifer's disappearance. And this is, I think, one of the reasons that I'll just leave it at that. It's one of the most sensitive parts. I don't think she intended on spending the night at her place that night. And I think this is one of the reasons that, although certainly there are people out there who think like I do now, to have this theory, to believe it, you're saying that Jennifer had another man in her life besides her fiancé. Well, people who think like I do aren't the only ones. Obviously, the police thought so too. And as far as I can tell, they still think so. I think that's still a very viable option. I will also say one more thing about the Tuesday morning scenario regarding Jennifer Kesse. It has also always struck me as being somewhat racist. Let me just be blunt with this. Because it is believed that those landscapers, those workers, were not American citizens, and they were of a certain ethnicity, that they must have done it. And you know me, I can't get with that. Let's just admit it. People of all ethnicities kill people. Of all races, genders too. But what I would call the abnormal amount of attention that has been devoted to that group, whereas we have to admit there were multiple. What are they all in on it? 5, 10. I mean, how many people do you want to make a party to this? And where is their supervisor and everything else? I mean, they took the car. What were they supposed to be doing there? They're supposed to be there cutting the grass, doing the hedges, building stuff, and then they just have time to abduct a woman and drive her out of there and go somewhere for a few hours and come back. It seems unlikely. Not to mention the guy that was, or the person, it's probably a guy, but I know he was wearing a certain type of clothes. They didn't look dirty to me, and I've been around enough landscapers to know it's hard to stay clean doing that job. Whereas that, remember, her car was returned on Tuesday morning. So if it happened Tuesday morning, they abduct her, something happens, and they bring the car back and put it right down the street, right close there. Whereas the guy, his clothes look pretty clean, and he's supposed to be a landscaper or something. Once again, seems unlikely. So that's my insight into Jennifer Kesse. I think I'm maxed out the 30 minutes on this one. No surprise, though, because this is one of those that I've had a chance to ruminate on for many, many years. So that's where I am with Jennifer Kesse. I happen to believe that she went missing because she had another man in her life, and I think this other guy was not happy that it's not what I would say is it's not a coincidence she goes missing right after being with her fiancé. He surely did not do it. But I think that somebody was jealous that she was out with her fiancé, is what I'm saying. So there you go. That is Jennifer Kesse. Moving on, what will be next? I'm not going to spend as much time on this next one. I got to talk about Karen Read. You had to expect that this would be on the list. You had to suspect that it would be. And I'm certainly, before I get into this, I am certainly not an expert on this situation with Karen Read, John O'Keefe, and everything that's gone on. Police officers getting fired and internal investigations and everything. I've been reading about it. But I have this podcast to run, and we don't cover unusual, suspicious deaths or outright murders. We do disappearances, and to my knowledge, there's no disappearances connected to Karen Read, John O'Keefe, or anybody else involved in this, in whatever happened. But I read about it like all of you do. I form opinions like all of you do. And it has certainly been interesting to watch. It's almost a little bit like a train wreck that you know is going to happen. You can't take your eyes away from it. What a movement with all the hats and T-shirts and everything else. I will tell you this. The publicity and marketing for all of this has been excellent. I'm sure most podcast hosts are envious, including myself. We all wish we could get this kind of publicity, but things like this have to happen naturally. But I'm also reminded of a saying of one of my favorite books of all time. If you've never read it, it's called The True Believer, The Nature of Mass Movements. And it's by a guy's name is Eric Hoffer, Hoffer. It is one of my favorites. It might actually be my favorite book of all time, fiction or nonfiction. That is how fascinating it is. And when I think about what's going on with Karen Reed, and I am going to give you my opinion, of course, that's why we're here, of what I think happened. There is, though, something that comes to mind when I see all of these people who surely have never taken an interest in any murder or incident or trial or anything before. In fact, I'm inclined to believe probably a lot of these people who are wearing these shirts and hats have done everything in their power over the years to avoid, being on a jury, but they'll go out and wear a shirt saying "Free Karen Reed." It's just kind of funny to me, even though the entire situation is not funny. It's more darkly humorous. But Eric Hoffer, in his book, The True Believer, The Nature of Mass Movements, wrote, "Every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually let's say it again. Every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket." And my assertion, having read that book at least a couple times, is we're somewhere in the business part of this right now. And I do, unfortunately, anticipate no matter what happened there, that eventually this will all degenerate into some sort of racket with grifting and everything else. That's my assertion. But I've read all the theories, and they seem crazy to me, including all the crazy theories, which in my opinion are most of them. The problem I have with this, and if you're not, I'm going to guess most of you once again know what I'm talking about. Karen Reed, with her man John O'Keefe, was dropping him off at a party. They had both admittedly been drinking, and somehow, and it was snowing, pretty heavy snow. And eventually John O'Keefe was found out in front of this house, and he was dead, and he had some injuries. And when Karen Reed's vehicle was eventually found wherever she went after dropping him off, it was found that, was it a taillight or something, had been cracked. And it seems, at least it looked like, a lot of people, of course, dispute this. At least the initial idea was that, yes, she dropped him off, but somehow she backed into him. So he got out of the car and was standing like somewhere around the back of the car, and somehow she backed up into him and then left the scene. And of course we know that that is a felony. And there are certainly people, I guess including the prosecution, that might think that she did this entirely on purpose because they were having problems in their relationship, if you want to believe that. Like I said, both of them had been drinking. Was Karen Reed drinking and driving? Almost 100%. But then there is another line of thinking, a theory that I think is crazy, that John O'Keefe actually did go inside the house to the party, and something happened in there. There was a fight. He got beat up, and they proceeded to drop him off back out in the street and then go cover it up by going and damaging that taillight of Karen Reed's car to make it look like she hit him. Something along those lines. And what makes this really, really, really difficult is all these people are police officers. Not Karen Reed isn't, but Joan O'Keefe is, where he was going. A lot of law enforcement people involved in all of this, and so was there a cover-up? And certainly, here at Unfound, we know a little bit about crooked cops. And maybe the most glaring one is, of course, is with Robin Abrams and the problem she got into in Illinois over 30 years ago, and she's still missing. So the problem I have with all of this is probably not just with Karen Reed's disappearance, but I think today not only are you learning about my attitude about some very well-known a disappearance, a murder, and we have this, maybe it's a murder, maybe it's an accident, it's a cover-up. You're learning about not only my specific ideas, but you're also learning a little bit more about how I reason these things out, looking at history and other cases. You're certainly getting more of an insight into this maybe than you'd ever get in an episode, and the only way otherwise you can hear me talk like this is on the live show on Monday nights, and I urge you to start tuning in, all of you who don't. Would love to see you there. It's only a couple hours. You don't even have to be there the whole 2 hours. Give it a half hour if you can spare. Or you can go sign up at patreon.com and see what I've had to write and say there. The problem I always have in situations like these, not just incidents or whatever happened here, but with disappearances and outright murders, cases that are obviously murders. What is it about human nature that the public so often wants to default to the most complicated theory? Why is that? It's really, really puzzling to me. I've seen that a lot with Unfound's disappearances. Maybe a good example is Mara Murray's. Let's name one that everybody knows. I personally believe that she took off into the woods, where there are more people than I could ever predict that think that, yes, she really did get picked up by somebody. And certainly with recent news about this guy, Stefan, and everything, you can go look that up for yourselves. But everybody does know that drunks are wrecking cars and running off from their wrecked cars all the time, right? And that happens way more than people getting into wrecks and getting picked up by murderers, right? Now, I realize that's happened in history. Car breaks down, and man or woman runs into the wrong person out in some lonely stretch of highway east of Omaha. To quote Bob Seger. It happens, but statistically, it is almost non-calculable. You can't even calculate that. It happens so infrequently. Whereas drunks are running away from cars all the time. But with Mara Murray, people still want to go to a very, 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 very unlikely theory that has no proof. I realize there's not necessarily any proof that she ran off either. But we have a lot of history to say that that's usually what people do in the circumstances that Mara found herself in that night. So when I bring it back to Karen Reed, we all know what the lesser of the least likely theory is, according to history, is some cover-up. Do cover-ups happen? Yes. Do things get staged in crimes? Yes, they do. Very, very small percentage. So, because the facts are clear, when we start looking at solved crimes, whether it's, or solved incidents, a disappearance that gets solved where no crimes were committed, it's an accident or something, like Esther Westenbarger drove into that retention pond on her own. No crimes committed except she was probably drinking and driving. But otherwise, there's no foul play or anything. When crimes get solved, when incidents get solved, if you looked at the history, the most of the time, like 99.9% of the time, the suspects and the causes and the reasons and everything else are just about exactly as was predicted. As would have been predicted by history. So why is it that so many people pick ideas that run counter to history? For disappearances, this is certainly so. It's not even a question. Are there unlikely resolutions? There are. But just to show you how predictable disappearances are, we've had 30-some disappearances somewhat resolved of all of the disappearances that we've featured on Unfound. And we have many, many Unfound Nows. That's the monthly series that comes out on YouTube every month at the end of the month, where I look at recent disappearances. Many of those have been resolved too. And if you don't know, I make predictions, once again, over at Patreon on all of this stuff. My accuracy rate is like in the 90-some percentile. Like with 95% accuracy, I can predict what probably happened. And a couple of those that I missed are actually early on in my career doing Unfound, like Esther Westenberger's got hers wrong. Crystal Morrison's got hers wrong. But that was very early on in Unfound's existence. Whereas now, 8.5 years in, even I'm a little amazed on how accurately I can predict these things. Like the 3 Unfound Nows that got solved here just within the past month. Got them all right. I don't like that these people are dead. I wish they had been found alive, but everything showed that they were probably deceased and what probably happened to them. I was right. These things are predictable if everybody out there wishes to be right. My problem is I don't know how many people out there really want to be right. I think they just want to be interesting. I'm interesting all by myself. I don't need to make things interesting by being cheeky with theories and everything. So that's also the way I look at with Karen Read. It's certainly interesting that it could be some sort of cover-up. It's certainly interesting that it's unfortunate and disgusting that if John Keefe got beat up by other cops and they all covered up. It's certainly disgusting, but I can see why people think it's interesting. I just don't know why people default to that. And as further evidence, given that everybody recognizes that Karen should probably not have been driving that night, just to put this in context. Drunk drivers are hitting people all the time here in the United States. What are the stats? The stat is 1.5 million drivers were arrested for DUI in 2024 in the United States. 1.5 million. And those numbers have actually come down in the United States. 13,000 deaths. That comes out to about, 40? Roughly 350, doing this off the top of my head. 40 deaths a day from DUIs. 40 a day here in the United States. One person killed every 39 minutes from people drinking and driving. I mean, it's horrible. And you think about that, it's like, well, what am I even doing out on the roads? I should just stay home and have everything delivered. So let somebody else take the chances out in these roadways. So it's not crazy to think that Karen Read in her state hit John O'Keefe. Very well could have been by accident. I'm not saying this was intentional. But the people are so quick to dismiss that when these are the stats that you can find in under a minute. Then I start thinking something's going on. Yet people are still insistent that Karen Read has been framed. She didn't hit her man. He got beat up at the party. Somebody went over and smashed her taillight after the fact. How would anybody even know that her vehicle would be there? I mean, I guess that's where she lived, but still. What also occurs to me, and I think this is really disgusting. Here's what I also think I know about all of this. It's, once again, I put it in here. It's funny, but it's darkly humorous and it's pathetic. That everybody backs the blue, the police, until it gets in the way of an awesome conspiracy theory. Then it's no holds barred. It's like everybody backs the U.S. military until Area 51, until they hear about Area 51 false flag operations and black helicopters. Then it's the military is covering up so much stuff. Well, people, which is it? Because I'm pretty sure as many Karen Reed shirts and hats and everything that I've seen out there over, the last year and a half or something, I bet those people also are people who they say, back the blue, the police. Whereas what they're also saying is these police had committed a cover-up of a murder, essentially, an assault and where somebody died. It's really disgusting. Lots of good people being manipulated by people who have access to grind with the police, with the military, and whoever else pops up in such stories. I don't know if people realize that we don't know necessarily who is behind a lot of people with a lot of ulterior motives out there. This is why I would urge all of you when it comes to signing petitions and things. I would never sign anything. I have never signed a petition in my life. You don't know where your signature is going to go. So people could be saying anything and then switch your name and put it on some other list. So when it comes to backing Karen Reed, I would be really, really going in hard into the it's a conspiracy, she's being framed idea. You got to be really, really careful what you're doing and what you're staking your reputation on. If you actually want to see a real conspiracy, being that I brought her up just a few minutes ago, you want to see a real police conspiracy, something that's really, really real and no doubt, look up Robin Abrams and what got done to her in Will County in Illinois over 30 years ago. She was certainly killed by police officers, and police officers covered it up. Certainly, 100%. And what happened to John O'Keefe and with Karen Reed, by comparison, it's virtually nothing. I'm very sad for John O'Keefe's family. But if you want to start comparing conspiracies, Robin Abrams is like the Titanic sinking with all those people getting killed. Karen Reed's is like somebody falling off their jet ski and the Coast Guard rescuing them. That's the comparison. If you want to even believe that it's a conspiracy. It's so clear to me that she was drinking and driving. She shouldn't have been driving. And I could see a situation. He gets out of the car. She doesn't know what she's doing, as people who drink and drive don't. And maybe she put the car in reverse instead of drive. She was going to pull away going forward, but it was parked. She doesn't pull it the whole way down into drive, or maybe it's a floor shifter. I don't know. But she puts it in reverse. He's standing back there. Maybe he's taking a leak before he goes inside. I don't know. She hits him. He collapses. She takes off, doesn't even realize what happened. I'm not saying she murdered the guy. But this is certainly a situation where she shouldn't have been driving and she hit somebody. And it very well could be like we've learned so many times, that John O'Keefe in the moment didn't understand how bad his injuries were. He gets hit, he gets knocked to the ground, maybe hits his head, but it doesn't knock him out right away. But he suddenly has a brain bleed or something like that going on. I didn't write down what his actual injuries were. But it's out in the cold and everything else. Nobody's going to see him. Nobody's out on the roads that night. Isn't that much more straightforward in everything that it's been marketed? This all reminds me, I have it written here, it all reminds me of those satanic cult theories of the 1980s. Allegedly there were people being sacrificed, even in my hometown of Leechburg, Pennsylvania. Which, I joke, but it might have been like the center of boredom on the earth. There were ideas that out in the woods around Leechburg, there were cults getting together. But that's the thing, is that I think people get into this stuff, these conspiracy theories and satanic cults and everything else, is because too many people are too dang bored. And their minds just want to be filled up with something. Me, I like being right. I don't mind being wrong, but I like winning. And you win by being right. As I have it written here, hysteria is real. It's not just a song by Def Leppard. People getting caught up, like I said, in a movement. They feel like they're part of something. And, they can lend they just don't have much else going on. This seems like a good cause. This woman's in jail, and the police might have committed a conspiracy to frame her and everything. Oh, I got to do that. I don't know. So, but the effects of people buying into things very real that aren't real. UFO sightings, same thing. Hysteria. People thinking that they saw something when they really didn't. Same thing. So I think that now, did she murder him? No, I don't think there was any intent. But on the other hand, I don't know what necessarily the specific laws are in Massachusetts. Maybe if you're drinking and driving and you hit and kill somebody, it's automatically determined to be murder. But Karen Reid, he died because of her. Even if it wasn't intended, there was no planning. Yes, were they getting along or not? I don't think there was intent or anything like that. I happen to believe that if Karen Reid had known what she did, even if she was drunk, which I believe she was, but even being drunk, if she had known that she backed into him, I don't think that she would have driven away. So I'm really willing to give her a lot of benefit of the doubt on this. But she hit him, and he died because of it. And I know cops have been fired and everything else. That doesn't mean anything to me. We get back to like the Thomas Brown issue. Thomas Brown, dead. Might have been murdered. Nobody's proven that. But I think what we can all say is in the course of the investigation, what did we discover? Well, there was a sheriff and some deputies in that county that had no business having the jobs that they did. Are they bad people? Probably not the people of the highest character, especially when it comes to law enforcement. You'd like to see somebody of with a bigger spine, a better spine, a more solid spine, and more educated and more trustworthy and everything else, certainly. But I don't think that we can infer because Nathan Lewis was a bad sheriff and forged paperwork on some things with training and everything. And then Pine Gregory and writing tickets that he shouldn't have been writing and everything. I don't think you can automatically jump to they killed Thomas Brown and covered it up. But that's what a lot of people are asking the rest of us to do with Karen Reid. I think it's all crazy. Certainly that guy who investigated was Massachusetts State Police, whoever he was, and whoever else. In over their head, maybe shouldn't have been police officers in the first place. And I'm certainly open to them looking at their histories and finding out if anything they shouldn't have been doing as law enforcement officers. But with Karen Reid, now, if she was sober, if it was different. If she were sober and it was a beautiful evening in the summer and, she had a history of harming John somehow, and maybe many times, and she was the aggressor, and maybe she had come after John with a knife and everything else, then that would be, then, of course, would really, really think that it was malicious. On the other hand, if, for example, Karen Reed wasn't even in the area where John was found dead with bruises, and he and somebody inside, maybe they had an ongoing feud and maybe had a bar brawl within the past month, then, okay, But those aren't the facts. So, an accident because she was drunk, not intentional, not malicious, no cover-up. And, of course, all of you who think that Karen Reed, needs to be freed and it was a cover-up, I just want to know, I just want to ask all of you people, are there any other drunk drivers you want to let off the hook? Just tell the rest of us now. Moving on, I got to talk about the Zodiac Killer. It's kind of funny when the topic of serial killers comes up. Of course, the topic is not funny, but it's funny when people bring it up to me. That for some reason, that my automatic response is, well, I just want you to know, yes, I do a true crime podcast, but we really don't do serial killers on Unfound. Certainly, there might be a couple disappearances that we have featured where a serial killer could be responsible, certainly. But for the most part, really not my area of expertise. It's usually what I tell people. And then what's funny is once we actually start talking about a serial killer, whoever it may be, man, I end up finding out, I know more about this than I think. And that certainly, like I said, it happens in one-on-one conversations with people in person, whether it's at a disc golf tournament or wherever else. And it happens on the live show, which is where all of these cases have been discussed before. That's why they are included in this episode. Kind of the same thing. When if the original Night Stalker has come up, or the Zodiac Killer, whoever, I'm always in the back of my head saying, I don't know if I really know enough about this topic, but then I start talking about it. So, yeah, I know who Gary Ridgway is. Yeah, I know who BTK is. I know who John Wayne Gacy is, and what they've done, in Eileen Wuornos and Richard Ramirez. I know all these names and kind of what they've done. I guess what I would say is I just am not obsessed with them, and I don't find it that interesting to try to get inside their minds to hear why they did it, even though I did go to this, a presentation, like I guess it might have been a year ago, where there is this woman speaking about serial killers, and she spoke here in Clearwater, and I went to see it. I thought it was okay. But, the motivations and why do they do this? Do they have brain issues, or they abused as children and all this? I don't know. I'm just not. I'm more into the mystery side. I think you all know. I want to solve things. So if there is some mystery, if there is some serial killer out there, I just want to find out who it is. I'm not necessarily interested in the motivations. We talk about motivations on Unfound, whether it has to do relationships, number one cause, jealousy, power. We talk about it, but really the goal is to solve these disappearances. I'm not so much into the psychology side, even though that can be helpful sometimes. So when it comes to the Zodiac Killer, though, I will admit that I've become more interested in what happened there in Northern California, late, mid-1960s into the 70s. And I also have to admit that the movie Zodiac with Robert Downey Jr., among other actors, Jake Gyllenhaal and Mark Ruffalo, I've watched that movie many, many, many times over the last few years. I have Paramount Plus. It's on there. I think it was on Amazon Prime for a while. I've watched it many, many times. Of course, it was done by David Fincher, who is a spectacular director. So I need to talk about the Zodiac because I've spent some of my spare time, which is not a lot, over the last couple of years, kind of putting together my own ideas. And the reason is that in reading up on it, and I have listened to Robert Graysmith's, played by Jake Gyllenhaal in the movie. He's the cartoonist who eventually became famous for writing the Zodiac book, and the movie was based on Robert Graysmith's accounting of what went on at the San Francisco newspaper, late 60s into the 70s, and dealing with the police, and Mark Ruffalo playing a real character. They're all playing real characters, Robert Downey Jr. included in that movie. I've done enough reading about it that I've kind of formed my own ideas, and I thought you might find those interesting because they are off the beaten track. And it's also because in reading about whether it's Arthur Lee Allen, who Robert Graysmith believes, I guess to this day he's still alive, thinks that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac Killer. And of course there's all sorts of people claiming that their father, their brother, their next door neighbor was the Zodiac Killer, all sorts of different reasons. I have to admit that I have not found any of those stories very compelling. And even with Arthur Lee Allen, if you watch the movie, it seems like it's almost a slam dunk. Well, if you listen to Robert Graysmith's book or read it, and then you start looking at other sources who have gotten into the Zodiac, you see that Robert Graysmith, well, let's just say he's might have spun some of those facts to make Arthur Lee Allen look a little more guilty than he maybe is. A lot of maybe confirmation bias, we might call it, is involved. And in fact, if you watch the movie, The Zodiac, the fictional movie, with actors, there are things in that movie that aren't true. And there's actually a website you can go to that lists the mistakes or fabrications or Hollywood licensing, you might say, that they took in that movie that in real life are not true and not true at all. And when you do that, you see, well, Arthur Lee Allen, I guess maybe it's possible, but not as much as you would be led to believe either in the book or in the movie. But I would say this is also what happens. I'm not necessarily blaming Robert Graysmith. I don't think he's necessarily a bad guy or anything, but I see this happen a lot with people who become obsessed on one case, whether it's a serial killer or a murder or a disappearance, like with Brian Schaefer or Mara Murray, Jennifer Kesse, whoever else. These people who become obsessed on one case, like Karen Reed, I just spoke about it. Same thing. They become obsessed, and then it's hard to be objective. And I think that's the advantage that I have doing the podcast, that I'm covering a disappearance almost every week. I wish it was every week, but we've been through that in this episode already. You can't become obsessed on any particular disappearance when you're covering a different one every week. And I think that's an advantage that I have to being objective about disappearances in general. So, regarding the Zodiac, my first idea about the Zodiac, the overall idea, I don't believe the Zodiac Killer is an American. Or at the very least, the Zodiac Killer is an American who spent a lot of time overseas, most likely in Europe. I would even say most likely in Germany. Why? Now, this is my own ideas. I don't think you're going to find any of this anywhere else. There are reasons, though. You'll have to determine whether these are just coincidences. Is there nothing to them? Am I seeing just what I want to see? Am I just trying to be unique or tricky or something? You can judge that for yourself. But the first thing I will say, and this is one of those things you have to know it. Common sense is not going to tell you this. Zodiac Killer used a couple different caliber guns in his murders. And the one I want to concentrate on is the last, or at least documented, last murder that the Zodiac Killer, and that was the taxi driver Paul Stine, S-T-I-N-E. I got Paul Stine driver picked the Zodiac Killer up in downtown San Francisco and ended up, and we're going to get into the intersection here in a bit, but dropped him off at a particular stopped at a particular intersection. And at that point, Zodiac Killer, sitting in the backseat, shot Paul Stine in the head and took a piece of a shirt that he later, part of it, he mailed to the San Francisco, is it the Chronicle, the Examiner, whichever one was featured in the movie. And that actually happened in real life. That, so we know for sure that the Zodiac Killer killed Paul Stine, but he used a 9mm gun to do that. And the reason it catches my attention is that I'm not necessarily a gun guy. I know a lot about guns. I own guns, and I don't, if you're anti-gun, fine by me. I'm just telling you how I came to my thinking on this. But if you go to enough gun ranges and you're not around enough gun people, there is a thing that certain kinds of people use certain types of guns. And it also comes down to calibers. Mainly older guys who are in the military, who have been in the military in their 60s or 70s, they're big fans of 45. Whereas when you start to get into younger men and women in their 50s, like Generation X, they're much more likely to shoot 9mm. In fact, 9mm is the most popular cartridge in the world now. But what's important to remember is back at the time that Paul Stine was murdered, shot in the head by the Zodiac Killer with 9mm, 9mm really, for the most part, was not a thing in the United States. 9mm caliber did not become what we recognize today as the most popular caliber in the United States for handguns until the 1980s. And the reason for that was the military, for so long, since World War II at least, had been using 45 caliber pistols as the sidearms for all the militaries, the different forces, armed forces, Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Navy, all of them. All used 45 caliber pistols. In the 1980s, they switched over to essentially, which was the Beretta 92. And that's 9mm. That's the handgun that, for example, John McClane, Bruce Willis used in Die Hard. It's also the same kind of gun that Mel Gibson used in Lethal Weapon. That's Beretta 92. That's the kind of gun, essentially, they went to in the military. 9mm semi-automatics became a thing in the 1980s. At the time that Paul Stine got shot by the Zodiac Killer, 9mm really wasn't a thing. What was most popular? 38 Special, 45, mainly revolver guns and caliber with respective calibers, whereas 9mm is really not a revolver caliber. It's a semi-automatic caliber, and I'm not getting into guns here. What's the difference? If you don't know the difference, I'm sorry. So it's really odd that the Zodiac Killer would have a 9mm semi-automatic pistol in San Francisco at the time he shot Paul Stine. And I would venture a guess that the amount of 9mm shootings in the United States around that time, not very common. Obviously, it became common in the 1980s, but at that time, very rare. And in fact, there were only a few 9mm semi-automatics on the market that anybody could buy at the time. As an example, the most popular handgun in the world now is the Glock 19 by Glock. Glock didn't start making guns until the 1980s, like 10 to 12 years after Paul Stine was murdered. 9mm, essentially up at that point, 9mm is a German cartridge. That's where it's got started. It's I guess you could kind of say it's a Nazi cartridge. It's a bullet that the Nazis used during World War II. And then it finally became worldwide at some point, like I said, in the 1980s, once the American military embraced it. So this is one reason that I think that this guy, the Zodiac Killer, can be connected to Europe, because 9mm at that time was way more common in Europe than it was in the United States, even though I know that Europe has restrictive gun laws and everything else. But it just really wasn't a thing in the United States. You can maybe look at it this way. When Dirty Harry came out in 1971 with Clint Eastwood, what kind of gun did he have? .44 Magnum. Popular movie, big police movie, gun movie. 15 years later, when Die Hard and Lethal Weapon come out, which you could also consider to be landmark movies when it comes to guns and police and everything, what are they carrying? 9mm. That just shows you how much changed. I realized that cops did not carry .44 Magnum back at the time. But you look at old TV shows, old movies, 60s into the 70s, what do police carry? Revolvers, all of them basically .38 Special, not 9mm. These days, movies, watch YouTube videos, badge cams and everything, virtually all police carry 9mm. So this is one reason I think that this guy somehow had some connection to Europe to have a 9mm gun that were so rare at that time. Moving on. What's never also been brought up is the murder location of Paul Stine, which happened at the corner of Washington and Cherry in San Francisco. Now, what a lot of people forget, even though it's noted in the movie and on Wikipedia and elsewhere, but I think most people forget this, that was not supposed to be the original destination of the trip. The fact is that, at least in Paul Stine's book, the Zodiac Killer, of course he didn't know it was a Zodiac Killer, but the Zodiac Killer actually wanted dropped off at Washington and Maple, not Washington and Cherry. And so they hypothesized in the movie, although I'm not sure this is true or not, that could it be that, of course, the Zodiac Killer wants to kill Paul Stine, but when they stopped at Washington and Maple, maybe there were other cars there, maybe there were people there, too obvious, so he made him go another block to Cherry where there wasn't anybody, and that's when he shot him. Of course, there still was a witness. But nobody's ever asked the question, why was the original destination Washington and Maple? I mean, granted, the killer could have picked, he knew he was going to kill Paul Stine when he got in the car. Could have picked any intersection, anywhere in San Francisco. So the question is there something unique about the intersection of Washington and Maple that was the original destination? And guess what? It is unique. And it's so unique that it's the only kind of intersection in the United States that has this particular quality. Would you believe this? This is something you never know what you're going to find when you start getting into this stuff, I guess, going down a rabbit hole. What is unique about the intersection of Washington and Maple? Does anybody know? There is a famous house built on the corner of that intersection. It is called the Russell House. And it was built in 1951. It was built by an architect. His name is Eric Mendelsohn. Yes, just like the composer. Eric, E-R-I-C-H, Mendelsohn, who died in 1953. So he designed this house. It was built in 1951. And then he died in 1953. But what is noteworthy, and Eric Mendelsohn, he has his own Wikipedia page. Well-known architect. That Russell House is the only house he ever designed in the entire United States that got built. The only one. He designed hospitals that got built. He designed synagogues that got built. But that and the house is still there. You can do Google Maps and find it and see it. and it is certainly unique. It is the only house designed by him in the entire United States. Now, guess what? Guess where Eric Mendelsohn originally from? Europe. And in fact, Germany. And in fact, he's Jewish. That's why he also built synagogues. And here's the other kicker about Eric Mendelsohn. Until he died in 1953, he was an architectural professor at Berkeley in San Francisco. Now I ask you, what are the odds that the serial killer, the Zodiac Killer, would pick an intersection that has all of those qualities? That on that corner is a house designed by a guy who only ever designed one house in the United States. It's on that corner, and that guy just happens to have been a professor at Berkeley in San Francisco. Now, of course, Eric Mendelsohn was long gone before Paul Stine got murdered. Coincidence or not, it's something to consider. It might mean that the Zodiac Killer knew something about architecture. Maybe he went to Cal Berkeley. Maybe he had Eric Mendelsohn as a professor or something. We don't know how old the Zodiac Killer is. It's always been believed that he was at least into his 30s. Not a young guy, but an older guy, seemingly. Maybe he was into architecture, and he knew that, and so he chose to pick that intersection. Of course, that's not where it happened, because something was going on at Washington and Maple that the murder didn't happen there. But to me, this is another European connection. The 9mm cartridge, and now we have this architect from Europe, now in the United States, was a professor at Berkeley, and a house, the only house he ever designed in the United States, is on that corner. Moving on. The language. Recently, within the last couple years, since AI has become a thing, they ran the Zodiac Killer's letters through AI. AI took a look at the English used by the Zodiac Killer in all the letters. All the letters at least could be connected to him. We realized there might have been some letters that were hoaxes. AI determined that the English that was used was what they call Middle English, meaning seemingly whoever wrote those letters has some sort of connection to Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote in Middle English. So once again, we have another European connection. So it wasn't modern English, like not what that group from the 1980s, what was it, a pop, kind of synth pop group, Modern English, isn't it their name? Or there was Bad English too. But they did this, and this is what got spit out. You can Google it. You can find that out. Now, the people who did this, though, thought that this might be for deception. I do not. I don't believe this. It's seriously, somebody's going to study Shakespeare just so the person can kill and send letters to the police and write in Middle English? That's crazy. It's totally crazy. I think we must always default to what is natural. Now, what's interesting is you read the letters, and you can kind of tell, even as an English speaker myself, and I don't speak any other languages, but I am a writer. I've written millions and millions and millions and millions of words. You can read it, and you know there's something kind of a little off on it. You kind of get the idea that what? Maybe an American didn't write this. Maybe somebody European wrote this. They speak, of course, most Europeans speak English. They speak a few languages. Maybe not their first language. You can get that idea from reading the Zodiac letters. Then we add in how he wrote Happy Christmas, and of course he put 2 S's at the end. We don't say Happy Christmas in the United States. We say Merry Christmas. He also uses the word kitties. Even though we use the word kitties in the United States, that word does not originally come from American English. That's also a European English word. Once again, you can look that up. And there were other words in there like prowl cars and other things. Obviously, words that the average American would not use. A person who was born in the United States, got public education in the United States, elementary school, junior high school, maybe college education. No matter if you're in Alaska or Florida, Maine, Hawaii, or whatever else. You know, we all get taught kind of the same English, even though we may have an accent and there are certain words particular to regions of the United States. But for the most part in America, 99% of us use all of the same words. But this Zodiac Killer uses a lot of words that just aren't normally used. They're English words, but they're just not normally used. He used them. This points to me, and we have, of course, some misspellings. Could be that English is not his first language. Once again, pointing me in a direction where are you most likely to learn English as a second language? Probably in Europe, even though I know that happens in China, other places. But at that time, in the 1960s, 1950s, 60s, you'd have to say, somebody's born in Germany, learn German, probably going to learn English too. You're born in Italy, probably going to learn English there as well. Probably going to pick it up one way or the other. So moving on, another reason that I've convinced myself that we need to take a look at this the Zodiac Killer being European. You know, they have the Zodiac's DNA and there's been no matches at all. Despite all of these other murders that have been committed and a lot of them solved eventually, no matches to the Zodiac, even though it seems he even licked the stamps of the letters that he sent to all of the different news outlets, newspapers at the time. You'd think that would be a dead giveaway. Nope. Hard to understand. Of course, there was no knowledge at the time that DNA would ever be able to be used to catch killers. So how is that possible? Well, it could be possible. Maybe he's not an American citizen and he has no relatives here and never had any children here. Remember, we have DNA database in the United States, but pretty much only of Americans. The DNA database is only going to work if Americans commit crimes, or, of course, if some foreigner commits crimes here, gets away, and then commits another crime somewhere down the road, then yes, would of course save it that way. But for the Zodiac Killer, maybe he just never had any relatives here. Maybe he had no family here. And so there's no way then to test, to go to 23andMe, even though I know it's going out of business, but then using Othram or whatever else to kind of link this all up like they did with the original Night Stalker. You can only do that if you can find some other connection of some other distant family member who has submitted DNA somewhere. But you're not going to be able to do that with any DNA that's been collected in Europe or anything. Which it also means is seemingly he never committed any crimes where DNA would have been taken over the past 50 years. And that's not unusual. The original Night Stalker quit cold turkey in 1986. Seriously, this is the one killer that everybody wants identified. And what are the odds that his DNA has never had any hits? Tosky, the cop, he went to his grave not knowing who the Zodiac Killer was, even though he was on it for all those years. Mark Ruffalo played him in the movie. What are the odds of having the DNA of a serial killer? Everybody is after him, just checking DNA all over the place. Nothing ever matches. So I think the Zodiac Killer was a foreigner. I think that at the very least, he might have been, maybe became an American citizen eventually at the time he started killing people. But I got to believe that he had strong connections to Europe. Maybe he went back there. Maybe that's the reason, he could vanish so quickly. He went back to wherever he was from. And maybe an idea should be, are there any unsolved murders in Europe? All over Europe, not just the mainland Europe, but England, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and even going over to Turkey. And remember, Russia is considered part of Europe too, even though I think a lot of people think, well, isn't that in Asia? But are there any similar types of situations of murders similar to the Zodiac Killers here in the United States, but maybe there's no letters or something like that? I think it's worth considering. Certainly doesn't seem they're making any headway anywhere else or any other way. But these are the reasons I think that he's not an American. He maybe became American, but not originally an American. All right, one more to go. Missy Bevers. Okay, last big case, last of the top 5 cases that I have discussed on the live show over the past few years. I think, being that you've already heard the first 4, I think you can understand why they're in the top 5. And I think all of you then also realize why Missy Bevers is also in the top 5. Of course, Missy Bevers, a woman from Midlothian, Texas, who was murdered in the Creekside Church of Christ on April 18th of 2016. So we're coming up on 9 years. Cannot believe it's like yesterday. It's weird that happened right around the time that I did the first episode of the first true crime podcast I was involved in. Of course, Unfound didn't start till September of 2016, but in April of 2016 is when I started with somebody else together. We started this other podcast right around the time that this happened. Although Missy's murder was not part of those episodes that we did, still it was just disappearances. But I remember talking to many people about her murder, and I don't think anybody. This is one of those things that I think, although a few things, but I think her murder is one of those ones where you know about it and you think, oh, this is going to get solved in no time. Oh, and here we are almost 9 years later. Whoever killed her, unless the person's committed other crimes, this person's walking around a free man or woman. And it just doesn't seem possible. Now, regarding Missy Bevers, I think when you even hear her name, if you know this murder, the absolutely first thing that's going to come to mind is the video. It has to be. Some people have their own personal cases and everything, but when it comes to video, this has to be the most well-known video in all of true crime history, doesn't it? The person, man or woman, I'm going to get into that, what I think. The person clad in police battle gear, like riot gear, with the heavy jacket and the pants and the helmet and everything, what we call riot gear, roaming the halls of that huge church and using various devices like a hammer or a flashlight or something to break glass and going from room to room. And my understanding is the part that you can find on YouTube is just a small part of the entire video. And you can't see the person's face. Person does seem to have what we might call a unique type of walk. Of course, every person's walk is unique. But this is one where some people have theorized that this person has some sort of knee injury or leg injury at one time, causing the person to walk a little different. And it's certainly not a situation where it's one, toes pointed straight forward, not like, people walking in the military or something like this. This isn't that, but a unique walk. I would say it appears that the person seems to be, I'll just say overweight. I'm not necessarily going to say fat, F-A-T, but seems to be overweight, but that could have been some sort of costume making it the person just look that way when the person's really skinny, possible. But just going around there, stalking the halls of that church, and then the way the public understands it, when you last see that person, the person's walking off screen to the right, that is when this killer went in there and bludgeoned Missy to death. She was not stabbed, my understanding. She was not shot. My understanding is she was beaten to death. And my understanding is also that there is video of this happening. Of course, they would never release that to the public. Although you can, certainly videos of murders have been released to the public, shootings, stabbings. You can see many of those on YouTube channel Active Self-Protection, which is a channel I go to almost every day. But something like that, probably not. But all of that, and it's still unsolved. You have the person on video walking. This church had broken into it. They seemingly have video of the murder taking place. And still unsolved almost 9 years later. It just doesn't seem possible. Of course, a lot of theories have been out there. They even thought that could Missy's husband have done it, looking at the way he walks. There was a theory out there that Missy was, of course, involved in fitness, and that's why she was even there that morning for some sort of stretching, yoga, Pilates class. And could this have been a jilted lover? Was she cheating on her husband? Could this have been, maybe if it's a woman, could this have been the girlfriend or wife of some guy that was jealous and knew that Missy was going to be there? And so the biggest question is, targeted or not targeted? Of course, I'm going to get to whether it's a man or a woman. But first, was Missy Bevers targeted or not targeted? Meaning, did the person show up there knowing that Missy was going to be there and kill her, making it look like it was a church break-in that got interrupted by Missy being there? Or was Missy just at the wrong place at the wrong time? Now, some important things to understand. My understanding is also that Missy usually held this class sometimes outside, but could not do so that morning, I think because of the rain. So that's also something to consider. So targeted or not targeted? My opinion is certainly that if we could see the entire video, but I realize I'm not necessarily complaining, if we could actually see the murder, I think we'd all be able to deduce whether this was targeted or not. I think we would be able to tell by how this actually all went down. For example, was there any talking between the two of them before it happened? Did the person surprise Missy? Was Missy have her back to the killer? Killer comes up and hits her. These are the types of things that would probably be able to narrow it down, become more leaning toward targeted or non-targeted. But I think what I'm also saying is if this video actually exists and the police have seen it, surely the police know if Missy was targeted or not. I just think you'd be able to tell by watching it. What I will say is this. If this were targeted, if this was some sort of plan by somebody knowing that she was going to be there, and this kind of hatched a plan, I'm going to pretend like I'm breaking in. This is actually a break-in, and Missy just got in the way of me stealing from the church. Why would somebody do that? Because then most likely police would not be looking at people around Missy. Missy, wrong place, wrong time, so we have to maybe start thinking it's some complete stranger from a different state who never heard of Missy Bevers, didn't know there was going to be a class there that morning, nothing. You can see the attraction to making it look like it was not targeted. It was just that she was in the wrong place, wrong time, whereas it really was targeted. You can see the reason somebody would want to misdirect investigators like that. What I would say, though, is that if this were targeted, though, there were only so many people in Missy's life who would go through all of that to murder her, to get that gear, to break into the church, to stop, to be in the church for however many minutes, just waiting for Missy to show up. And it just doesn't seem that, at least to the video that we've seen, that the person was really waiting for anyone. Maybe the police have video that says differently. But with that kind of murder, that kind of violence, this had to have been somebody, if it were targeted, somebody who really knew Missy really well and really, really hated Missy really, really well. And what I would say, I don't know Missy's entire life story or anything, but it just seems to me that type of person would be easy to pick out. We might look at, was there anybody like look at Missy's, social media? Of course, Facebook existed at the time. Was she using Instagram? Was TikTok a thing yet? I don't know. Look at her emails. Look at any text, phone calls, and because of course they got her phone. And if you'll remember, I think her husband was out of town, but still people suspected him. But if this was something where somebody went through this whole thing, the gear, the breaking into the church, getting up that early in the morning, walking around making it look like the church is getting robbed, that is a lot of planning. And only somebody with deep hate would do that. And how many people could have hated Missy that bad? Not many. I'm not saying she couldn't be. Anybody can be hated. Anybody. There are people hating Mother Teresa. But there could only be so many, and I think that people in Missy's life would be able to direct investigators to those people. And I think that it would be fairly obvious very quickly by talking to the person, asking looking at the person, the way the person's built, the way the person walks, how they react, the reaction to how did they find out that Missy was dead. You'd think it would be solved by now if this was targeted. It just seems to me. Certainly could have been, hey, we can't rule, I guess, some sort of murder for hire. Those happen too, usually unsuccessfully. And it's amazing how many people get caught hatching plans. In fact, there was just some famous guy, not like Tom Cruise or anything, but some was an actor or somebody that his wife was trying to hire somebody to kill him. You get a couple of those a year, and they're usually unsuccessful. Usually, it's the wife's talking to some undercover cop. She thinks she's talking to a hitman, but she's talking to some other undercover cop. It's amazing how many of these plans get sniffed out before they, come to fruition. Certainly could have been that somebody who really, really wanted Missy dead hired somebody to do all of that. Once again, though, man, that's a lot of work. If they know Missy's schedule and they know that she's going to be at the church that morning, wouldn't it just be easy to just wait outside her house and just shoot her? Maybe she's pulling out and maybe there's no opportunity. But this is the only way this is the plan they created. Yeah, you're going to break into this church. How would these people know that the church doesn't have like an alarm or something? Why bring a church into it? Why bring breaking into a church into it? I can understand covering your identity up, but all that other stuff sounds like a lot of work. Not to mention, though, you get this equipment. It could be traced. Who knows? It just seems like a lot of work. To kill an average person. So I'm inclined to believe that she was not targeted. I'm inclined to believe that it was wrong place, wrong time. And I think that's the reason it's still unsolved, because that means that anybody could have done it. Whereas if it was targeted, then the circle of people who could have done it is very, very small. We also have to remember that there was a car seen down at some other business complex or something earlier that morning. We have to remember this all happened very early, and it was at 6 in the morning. It was still dark out. But not long before Missy would have been pulling into the church, there was a car seen cruising around some other business down the street, like different stores, maybe some sort of fast food chain down the road, just riding around. I think it was it a Nissan Altima? I think it turned its lights off, turned them back on. What's this person doing? It doesn't seem like that person or the car has ever been tracked down. Sounds like something. Person's never seemingly come forward. In addition, if you're planning to kill somebody, if this was staged, if this was targeted, wouldn't you actually really bring a real deathly weapon? I mean, certainly she was bludgeoned to death. It worked. But if you're really going somewhere to kill somebody, would you not make sure, like, bringing a knife or a gun? This is Texas, after all. The best you can do is bludgeoning her with whatever, a flashlight and whatever else this person had, a billy club or whatever. What happens if Missy tricks you and gets it out of your reach? It just doesn't seem, gets it out of your hand. It just doesn't seem like in a very efficient way to go about killing somebody when you're planning it. And we know, I mean, I know this is a joke, kind of, but anybody can get a gun in the United States if they really want one. So if this was planned, the weapon of choice seems poor. You're going through all this stuff, getting the equipment, breaking into the church, making it look like you're breaking the church, but then you pick some weapon that might not work. It's too much risk to murder somebody this way if it was targeted. And who wants to kill someone and has no problem being seen on video? Remember, the person can't really... That person has a disguise on. Person has the mask and everything on. Can't see the face, but still there's no guarantee that that's really, really, absolutely 100% going to work. So who wants to kill someone and has no problem being seen on video? If the person knew Missy's schedule, she could have been shot outside her house or when she's taking out the garbage or something. I would also say my impression of watching the video did seem to show that the killer was surprised by somebody being there. That, you know, if you're looking at the screen, the killer's on the left side of the screen trying to open some door, and then all of a sudden turns away and walks away. And my understanding is not long after that is when Missy was killed. It does seem to me that the killer was at least a little surprised. You know, there wasn't any creeping around or anything. But on the other hand, why is it that when the killer saw that there was somebody else in the church, the killer didn't run off? I guess that could push you back in the direction of being targeted. Up to you. But it very well could be that the reason, maybe the person just figured, I can't get out of here without this person seeing me. Could be. Now, do I think it's a man or a woman? Targeted, you know, like I said, my inclination is to believe that Missy Bevers was not targeted, and that's the reason I think it's still unsolved. Now, man or woman? It's probably going to surprise you, but I actually think that this was a young, overweight man that did this. Why? Well, just from a stats point of view, we know that women commit crimes, of course, at a much slower rate, lighter rate, smaller rate than men do. But we also know that women, when they do commit crimes, commit felonies, A lot of it has nothing to do with violence. When women are breaking the law, what are they doing? Shoplifting, fraud. If they're getting into fights, they may batter their boyfriend or husband. Really, when it comes to violence, a lot of the time it's women on women getting into fights. Things like that. Drinking and driving, certainly. Drugs, all those things, of course, that men do too. But women, when it comes to crime, a lot less violent crime and more crimes of opportunity, crimes involving possessions and money and things like that. Ripping off little league organizations. And how often are women breaking into anything, not just a church, but any building to steal stuff? Just not that common. So that's why I lean toward it being a man. And then the reason I say it's a young man, what I see from the walking, if I decide that it's a man, I see even though I know that her husband, who was not young, kind of walk like that, I see a young man kind of fumbling around. If you look at, how the killer is, looking at stuff, what he's going for and everything, this seems to be a somewhat immature, young, naive, inexperienced male. In contrast to if this was a 35-year-old, most 35-year-olds, have experience with tools. Even I do. Even though I've never owned a house and I've hardly ever been in Lowe's or Home Depot or anywhere else. Even I have experience with hammers and wrenches and things. This person does not strike me, this killer did not strike me as having a lot of experience with tools. So that's why I think this is some young, overweight man. And I will even go further. There's something else that occurs to me. Looking at the entire situation, I don't know why it is, but I'm inclined to think that this might be a young man maybe with diminished intelligence, maybe a low IQ or something like that. Because if this is let's say it's a young man, 17, 18 years old, with an IQ of 120. I'm not saying people with IQs of 120 can't kill. They certainly can. But it seems to me that type of person would be more likely to get the hell out of there. Somebody's here, I'm getting out. Whereas somebody else might not be able to process all of that. And in fact, the person might process it as, oh, somebody's here and they're getting in the way of what I'm doing. It might not even totally understand the concept of life and death and violence. Because when you watch the video as a whole, once again, this is just an impression. There's no facts to back it up. That you could get the idea that this could be some sort of play acting. Somebody dresses up in this uniform, got all these tools and everything, and is going to break into this church and just kind of walk around and do all of this, kind of roam around and fill in with doors and breaking windows. And it looks more like play acting than an actual criminal. You want to watch criminals, just watch YouTube. And all the security cameras, mostly men breaking into stores and other places. They're very direct. They know what they want. They know where to go. They try to get in and out as fast as possible. It doesn't matter how neat or unneat they are. They don't mind. He had all this thing kind of going on during COVID and these flash mobs. You know what people breaking into stores looks like. What I see in that video doesn't look like that. This person's in no hurry, doesn't mind that the lights are on, doesn't mind that the cameras are on, and the camera's right there for multiple places for everybody to see, including the killer. doesn't matter. Just seems like this could be somebody that doesn't totally get all of it. Doesn't understand the implications. Now, granted, the person's gotten away with murder for 9 years, but doesn't totally understand the implication of being there and doesn't maybe totally understand what he or she is doing, even though I believe it's a he. So what am I wondering now, given that it's almost 5 years as we get to the end of this this episode? I would be thinking about beefs against the church. Were there any? Did the church tick off somebody for somebody reason? To tick off a family? Did somebody get in trouble at the church in the preceding few months? I would also want to know, have any other churches in the area had any break-ins? Anything like this? Or even it looked like somebody was trying to break in. Or break-ins in that area that seems similar to this one. I'm guessing the police have looked into all this. We just don't, the public doesn't know if this is something or not. But these are the things that come to my mind. I'm guessing they've come to the police department's mind as well. Also, you can't rule out when it comes to breaking into places, you can't rule out local addicts. They'll just try to go and steal anything from anyone. And it could be somebody breaking in there. I guess some churches might have some things of value. Of course, we know giving money to the church and the dollars that are flowing and everything. But my impression with that is that usually that money, goes to the bank pretty quickly. Because why? Because you don't want to leave a lot of cash lying there. Somebody finds out, you will be getting broken into. Your church will get broken into if it's locked. So these are just some of the things that come to my mind regarding the murder of Missy Bevers. Like I said, this is one that I think everybody at the time thought, got the video, and we got the husband could be a suspect, even though he's supposed to be in another state. Maybe he got somebody to kill his wife, or could it be Missy was cheating on her husband? And I think maybe there was proof of that at least one time that she was doing that. I don't have that in my notes. That's just something that popped in my head. Could it be that? Could it be some other woman that's jealous? I continue to believe that if it was that straightforward, it would be solved by now. These people are going to get, it's a murder. This isn't a disappearance where police blow it off. This is a murder in a church. And my impression is they're going to do as good a job as they can looking at possible suspects and still unsolved. So we have to start looking elsewhere. Have to start looking at beefs with the church, beefs with the pastor. Did somebody get fired? Was the church getting ripped off by somebody and this person's bitter? All along those lines, looking at other crimes that could be similar. Checking out local addicts. Do they fit the description of the walk? Because even though the gear can hide the identity, it can't disguise a walk. And it does seem to me it's fairly unusual. And you also want to maybe take a look at local young men that fit the description who, I hate to say it, maybe somebody of low IQ just out there, playing around and not totally understanding the implications of what is going on. So that's all I got. Those are the top 5 cases that I have talked about on Unfound over the past few years. I've given you my insights into all of them. Maybe some of them are surprises, maybe not. I think it gives you another good idea of how my mind works. And I think, I think that I'm Mr. Boring when it comes to theories. Although with Jennifer Kesse, I'm in the minority, surely. With the Zodiac Killer, I'm certainly in the minority. Karen Reed, I don't really have a good feel for that one as far as am I in the minority or the majority. All I know is the people who support Karen Read are very vocal. That doesn't mean there's a lot of them. Regarding here, Missy Bevers, hard for me to say, hard for me to get an idea what people think. Whether the killer's man or woman, was it a targeted or not? It's hard for me to get a feel for that one. Maybe I can pull that in the discussion group. And then with Adnan Syed thinking that he did it, I think that I am in the majority on that one. My impression, despite Serial trying to convince everybody that he didn't do it. So maybe I'm not as straightforward and boring with my theories as I think. But I appreciate you listening. Sorry I could not provide a new disappearance this week. Things happened, as I explained at the beginning of this episode. Still going to continue to try to get as many guests as possible. But even though it's 8.5 years into the podcast, we still get flakes and we still get people that don't respond and stand myself and Emily up. It happens as much as it did back in 2017. Why that is, probably a lot of different reasons, and I don't think it has anything to do with us. Keep working. That's all we can do. Thanks for listening. Please give this episode a thumbs up, and that's the program. I'm Ed Denzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.